So welcome again to the April session of BusinessWise Insiders. As usual, we're going to keep everybody on mute during the presentation portion of today's session, just to minimize any inadvertent disruptions. The presentation itself will last about 20 or 25 minutes, after which, as I just mentioned, we'll come back together for a group discussion where you'll all get a chance to introduce yourself, ask questions, offer your own insights on today's topic or anything else that's on your mind. If you do have a question during the presentation, feel free to ask it in the chat window. And if we can't get to it during the presentation, we will come back to it afterward. So today we're going to be talking about the topic of objection handling. So what to do when your prospects say no in various forms. But before we start, I want to emphasize that the no's we're talking about for the purposes of today's presentation are the ones that you get at the very beginning of the prospecting process, when you're working to start that initial conversation with a prospect and set a first-time appointment with a new good lead. And even though some of the material in this presentation may apply later in the process when you're dealing with resistance during a discovery meeting or later in the process, what we're really focused on today is overcoming that initial resistance to a first-time engagement. And with that in mind, I just invite you to put yourself in that mindset of reaching out to a new prospect for the first time. So what do you say when you reach out, whether it's over the phone or in an email, to ask for your prospect's time, and your prospect says no? And there are a couple of important points here. The first, this is almost a trick question because just about everyone offers resistance to that first request. So really what we're asking here is, when that initial resistance inevitably comes, are you prepared to respond? And what's your strategy? But let's just back up for a second, because we need to look a little closer at the question of why should I care about no? Now, you might be thinking, of course, sales reps can't take no for an answer. We deal with no all the time. It's our job to fight through no and get to yes. And you're right. The first reason we need a strategy for no is that no is a fact of life in B2B sales. A sales rep doing cold outreach and not having a strategy for no is like a golfer not having a strategy for when they don't get a hole in one. Of course, we want the immediate and eager yes, just like we want a hole in one, but it's not realistic. No's are just part of the game. But I've seen it so many times. Sales reps become so fixated on finding the immediate yeses that they essentially ignore and forget the prospects who offer resistance. They plow through them in that hunt to find a yes. And so their no strategy essentially becomes, no problem, thanks for your time, let me know if you change your mind. But the reason no's are potential opportunities is because they're often not actually a no. When you get a no, especially at the beginning of the cold prospecting process, what it really means is, I don't see value yet. And if I could sum up this entire presentation in one sentence, that's what it would be. No means I don't see value yet. And that's okay. Just like a golfer's job is to move the ball forward toward the tiny hole that's hundreds of yards away over bunkers and water hazards and rough, it's the sales rep's job to move the prospect toward a yes in the face of resistance by helping them to understand and perceive value. And then the final lesson here is that it's not just about pushing back at resistance. If they don't see value yet, you're not going to yell at them and convince them to see it. You can't tell your prospect they're wrong because you'll never win that argument. Instead, you need to change their perspective by getting at what they care about. And we're going to talk through a variety of different types of no's that you get at the beginning of prospect engagement. But before I do that, I just wanted to invite Deborah to offer any remarks on the topic at the top of today's presentation.
Something we want to be thinking about throughout our whole process is that we want to care about our prospects, clarify what they're saying, and be curious. So at this point, we just want to find out more.
Exactly. All right. And so there's obviously a lot going on here, a bunch of layers that every sales rep has to sift through. And often it's in a very tight time frame. If you're on a cold call with a prospect, you have to discern what the no means in real time, which is why it's really important to approach this challenge of objection handling with a solid blueprint that prepares you to deal with a couple of pivotal questions. And the first question, especially at the very beginning of a prospect interaction where all you're asking for is a few moments of your prospect's time, is whether the resistance they offer is a legitimate concern or is just an attempt at brushing you off. And brush-offs are automatic. The prospect doesn't even know what they're objecting to yet. They might take the form of, I can't talk right now, I'm heading into a meeting, or just send me an email, or sorry, not interested. And they often sound like legitimate objections, when in reality, they're just avoidance tactics on the prospect's part, which is understandable because oftentimes you're reaching a prospect at a time when it's not ideal for them to talk. They don't know you, they don't know your company, they aren't thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. So the natural reaction on the part of the prospect is to brush you off. But with a brush off, your goal should be to do whatever you can to pivot towards substance. And you can do that by framing a short conversation now as a time saver for your prospect. So you can say, I don't want to waste your time. Rather than calling you back later, let's figure out whether this is even a priority for you and whether it will be worth it for you to hear some more ideas about how to address it. So when you frame it that way, you can sort of get to the heart of whether the brush off is legitimate and pivot towards substance. So the second blueprint issue is recognizing that there's a difference between resistance over the phone and resistance over email, because each presents different challenges and opportunities. Resistance over the phone is high pressure, but with the right strategy, it's often easier to turn into a conversation because you've already got your prospect in a conversation. So for example, when you try the tactic I just mentioned on the previous slide, the prospect pretty much has to give you an answer, and there's a decent chance that they'll agree to talk for a few moments right then and there. On email, it's much easier to ghost somebody. But with email, you have an opportunity to show your prospect that there's a real live person on the other side when you receive that initial reply of resistance. So any kind of email response from your prospect gives you the chance to start a one-on-one conversation, which is the ultimate goal of any email prospecting campaign. And then as a bonus, this sort of asynchronous conversation like email, where you're sending an email and your prospect sends a response at a later date, they're often much more likely to be resurrected at some future date than conversations that start with a cold call. So the point here is, as you approach objection handling, make sure you tailor your tactics to your outreach channel, understand there's a difference, and be prepared to deal with both types of resistance. So here's a basic roadmap that you can use to approach any of these kinds of objections. Embrace, inform, and ask. So first, don't ignore or bulldoze your prospect's objection. Again, it's not about telling, it's about showing. Show your prospect that you're listening by acknowledging the objection, and then use that as a pivot point. Now, the next step is to inform your prospect. Show your prospect that you have insights and ideas into the challenges they face. Show them that they get value from a conversation with you, even if it never goes any further. And then finally, and critically, ask questions, because that's how to dig deeper into what your prospect cares about, and it's how you steer the conversation toward more friendly and fruitful ground. Of course, the key here is to be able to deftly navigate this path, to use bridge statements that get you from embracing the objection to informing to asking, and we'll talk about how to use this roadmap with specific objections in a moment. Now, of course, how you use that roadmap will depend on the kind of resistance your prospect offers. So different categories of resistance will lend themselves to different strategies for shifting your prospect's perspective. So today, we're going to do our own digging into these 4 common objections. I'm not interested, I've had a bad experience, it's not the right time, or send me more info. We're going to look at what they really might mean, and then the specific tactics that you can use to steer the conversation in a promising direction. Deb, did you have anything to add here before we get into the 4 objections?
So early on, when you're listening to those objections, I think it's really important to keep a smile on your face and try to convey a real trustworthy attitude, curious attitude to your prospect that's almost more important than the words. It's
a great point, Deb. All right, so let's look at each objection a little more closely and see how you can use it to dig deeper and potentially move the conversation forward. So objection number one is, I'm not interested, or in other words, I'm fine with the way things are. I'm fine with the status quo. So here you have a prospect giving a sort of all-encompassing version of the not interested objection. I'm not interested, things are fine, we're happy with our current vendor, we don't want or need what you're offering. And then underneath, you have some possible subtext. What they might actually be saying gives you an opportunity to show some value. And the key phrase here is, it hadn't occurred to me that I might have a problem or that I could benefit from a solution. That it hadn't occurred to me is so critical because, again, no means I don't see value yet. And the reason it hasn't occurred to them is because they don't know what you know, that the ideas, insights, and ultimately products and services that you bring to the table can provide a better understanding of what really matters to their success. And the not interested objection in particular is one of the most common catch-all ways that a prospect can resist, and it can take many forms. It can sound like we don't have that problem at all. We don't see the benefit of your solution. Maybe it would be, we have that problem, but it's really not that important right now. Or things are just going fine. No reason to discuss your solution. It's sort of a blank slate that invites you to respond with open-ended questions to uncover pain, to learn more, like Deb said earlier. Now, a few years ago, the first question here might have been something like, oh, well, if X isn't a problem, then can you tell me what problems and priorities you are facing? But any sales rep can ask questions about pain. And in that transaction, the prospect receives really nothing of benefit. You're asking them a question, they're giving you information about their situation. They're not really getting any value. In fact, they're giving information to you when it should really be the other way around. So the new tactic is, again, to help clarify the pain for your prospect by offering ideas and insights that you already know will matter to them. Of course, you can also flip it around and focus on what is working, which is a great way to get your prospect talking and presents new opportunities. So that probably means you're doing a good job at X, is that right? And then the last question here is an example of a question that we at BusinessWise might use, but you can adapt it to whatever product, service, or solution you offer. So does that mean you're not looking for new clients in your local market? Clarifying questions like these rephrase and reframe the issue and might get a different response that can lead to a conversation. So the key takeaways here are, again, expect the resistance. Golfers don't come to play only with a driver. They put a dozen different clubs in their bag and they practice hitting out of the rough and out of the sand. Sales reps should do the same thing. They should be clear on the value that they bring to the first appointment, even if the prospect will never buy. And they should be comfortable with a number of different ways to reframe the issue in a way that helps clarify what your prospect really wants and needs. And then as you uncover what is important to them, you may also find it appropriate to disqualify a prospect. I mean, what we're doing is learning more. We really don't know anything about the nature of their objection when they first offer sort of a not, generic, not interested resistance. So remember, you have a say in this too. You determine with whom you want to meet based on whether you think you can provide something that benefits them. And approaching it from that sort of even playing field can help add to the trustworthiness that Deborah mentioned, add to the professional and collegial nature of the conversation, and reinforce the sense that they're getting value in the same way that you're getting value, so that it's a transaction where both parties benefit. Deb, anything to add as far as context there?
In other insiders, we've talked a lot about how valuable it is to focus your target market with your dream clients in terms of the ones that you're actually calling by phone. And when you do that, that idea of clarifying and finding out if you want to disqualify this prospect is really critical. So it's really, really important to be calling on your dream clients so that if one falls out of the bucket, you know when you can put more in.
Right, and it also just reinforces the point that building a list of prospects that are that A-tier list of prospects you know will benefit from your product or service is hard. Of course, you want everybody you call to be somebody who could benefit from your product or service, and at BusinessWise, we aim to create target markets that are full of those types of prospects. But not everybody will be the perfect fit, even if you do all your homework. So asking questions can give you valuable information about who to drop and when to move on. So that brings us to objection number 2, which is bad timing. Now, bad timing is another one of these objections that could take many forms. A prospect might just have a lot going on at that very moment, and the issue you're looking to help address isn't a priority. Maybe it's that the budget isn't there right now, or that they just signed a contract with another vendor. It all boils down to not right now. But what they may really mean is that I have a decent reason to say no right now, but under different circumstances, I might say yes. And that's good because it means there's a promising flip side to the bad timing objection. Another time might actually be better. And the best way to unpack this bad timing objection is to get at the root of why that might be the case. So here you have a few options. The first is to go right to the heart of the objection. If it's a bad time, then that means something external is keeping them from addressing their problems, which is itself a problem. The second is to emphasize that you're not asking them for anything more than a no strings attached meeting. There's never a bad time to have a conversation and share ideas. So lean into that. Your prospect will get some ideas. It costs them nothing. So timing and budget shouldn't even be a concern at this point. And then finally, it may actually be true that another time is better, which gives you an opportunity to create a mutually agreed upon time frame for follow-up. So sort of saying, if not now, when? I'm happy to follow up at another time. When can I check back with you? So to put it simply, sort of ask, if not now, when and why? Because bad timing often means either we don't think we have the budget right now, we don't see this as a high priority right now, and that's your cue to offer those insights and ideas that change their perspective. And if in doing so, you can demonstrate value in the form of ROI, then a budget may actually appear and the timing may be right. And again, if it really isn't the right time, always have as a backup to make a follow-up plan. Deb, anything to add here?
This is often a good time to, when you don't get an opportunity for an immediate appointment, to make sure you get information that you can use in that email follow-up to make it personal and refer to the conversation that you've had.
All right, so now moving on to objection number 3. This is when a prospect has had a bad experience with a similar product or service in the past. So here on the top, you have the prospect saying, I tried something similar before and it was terrible. I'm not making the same mistake twice. But on the bottom, here's what it could really mean. I had a problem. I tried to fix it. It didn't work. Now I'm afraid of spending money on another doomed attempt. And this bad experience objection is an explicit acknowledgement that your prospect knows she has a problem that needs fixing. Since uncovering pain is the first step toward discussing solutions, this kind of objection is actually a great opportunity to ask pointed questions, offer insights about what you know to be trends and problems that are faced by other prospects in that industry, and then get your prospect talking. So in some ways, it means your prospect has 2 problems. They have the original problem, and then now they have a fear of addressing that problem. And you can use both to illustrate the costs of inaction by asking something like, how much do you think the failure to address this problem, how much do you think the fact that you tried before and it didn't work is costing you in the long run? And our takeaways here are really meant to emphasize that the bad experience objection presents sort of a target-rich environment for clarifying your prospect's problems and changing their perspective. There's the old problem, which hasn't gone away. There's the new problem, which is a fear of acting and failing. And all of that can help you reframe their definition of value. And your unique value, your insights in combination with your solution, will help them see and solve their problems in a way that no one else can. Deborah, anything from you here?
Particularly with a bad experience, but even in any kind of objection, however many facts you have to prove that what you have to offer is a better idea or the right solution, none of that will resonate if you haven't built trust. So remember to empathize and to build trust before you go into the major proof about why your facts are right.
Right, and that sort of gets back to showing and not telling. Hearing, being combative and argumentative with somebody about their resistance, without showing them that you actually have the ideas and the credibility to change their perspective, will stop the conversation right then and there. So this is, again, not about battling resistance, it's about embracing it and pivoting. All right, finally, we have objection number 4, which sort of falls in the category of send me more info and I'll get back to you later. And this objection to send more info is tough because it can seem like less of an objection than it actually is, and it can tempt you to handle it in the wrong way. Sometimes send me some information and I get back to you is just what the inexperienced cold caller wants to hear because it gets them off the phone. You get to send an email with a bunch of information about your product or service, and you sort of lie to yourself that you've moved the ball forward and they're going to get back to you and want to set an appointment. But in truth, send me more info is most of the time just a non-confrontational way of saying no, or maybe even a brush off. And if you take them at their word and then send them some info with the hope that they'll call you back eager to meet, they won't. That's what they want you to do so that they can then ignore you. But luckily, it opens the door to reframing your prospect's problem and delivering value on issues that resonate with them. So what's the best strategy in this case? So again, you can take this in a few different directions. The first is to take their objection as a cue to show them that you don't want to waste their time. More info won't help if it's not relevant to their needs. So pointing them to your website probably isn't a good idea. Instead, offer a short, no strings attached meeting as a better alternative. I can understand why that's of interest or concern. When we meet, I can give you some ideas. And then you'll be able to better understand what they really want and need. And then finally, as a last resort, you can use their own request to create a follow-up plan, which may give you another chance to ask some of these same questions. So I'll send you some materials ASAP, and then I'll follow up in time frame. Sound good? Or another way to do it would be, after I send you the materials, should I follow up later this week or next week? Give them the opportunity to define the time frame, but don't let the opportunity fall away to make that follow-up plan, because it's a really good opportunity to sort of create that mutual contract where you can create an opportunity for a second conversation. And then, of course, one thing to be careful about here is the endless stall where you end up being strung along by your prospect. They keep asking for more information. They keep pushing back your attempts to follow up with them. So if possible, aim to get your answer on that first call rather than kicking the can down the road. And then otherwise be very clear and strategic, again, about your follow-up plan. Deb, any magical insights into the send more info objection?
Well, certainly asking for more info or send more info is kind of an older tactic because everybody knows you've got stuff on your website. So I'm always really hesitant to actually go send specifics before you've had an actual conversation. You can always, however, follow up with an email that has your website and whatever specific information from that call. And I think that's the kind of effectiveness and not wasting your time.
Right. And then again, asking a specific question about the type of info they're looking for can help generate sort of another sequence of questions where you ask them why that's important to them. And then you can get into any number of the different questions that we talked about in the course of this presentation to really uncover whether they know they have a problem, offer insights that shift their perspective, and sort of redefine their definition of value. All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thanks again for attending, everybody, and I hope you guys stick around for the discussion.